attend the 8th annual Africa Energy Indaba that starts in Sandton, Johannesburg. It's happening from tomorrow, the 16th to the 17th. The World Energy Council, WEC event, is globally regarded as providing access to key energy decision makers in Africa. From the South African National Energy Association, we are joined in studio by Statham and Reuel, Khoza, who of course is the chairman of Globeleq. Good to have both of you, and thank you very much for being with us in studio.
Good morning.
So, I mean, last year's big story, of course, when we looked at energy, was the issue of blackouts in South Africa. I mean, nothing that could be ignored. Is this going to be up there, or what would you say is going to be topping the agenda, Dr. Khoza? Let's start with you.
I don't believe you can ignore it completely, because it was quite a pain for industry as well as residential consumers. Fortunately, things are improving somewhat, and we hope that there'll be greater improvement where South Africa is concerned. But lack of reliable electricity is a continent-wide phenomenon.
Yeah.
In fact, less than 50% of the African population has reliable access to electricity. Some, in fact, it's as low as 10%, 5%.
Sure.
South Africa, fortunately, up there, touching the 80s. The Maghreb region also, historically, particularly Morocco, Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia used to also have almost universal electricity, but Libya, because of some of the setbacks in recent times, also have fallen back quite a bit.
Yeah. So obviously the energy supply, lack of energy in the countries and on the continent is one of those issues that's going to top the agenda. In your opinion, Brian, what else do you think the pertinent issues are that need to be spoken about?
Well, we're going to be focusing quite a lot on regional integration, because there's so much needs to be done in terms of normalization of regulation and legislation to facilitate cross-border energy transactions, because in many cases the projects on themselves are much larger than the market in any individual country. So to develop, for example, Kudu gas in Namibia can't absorb all the product that would come out of that project, so they need to be able to sell the product into Botswana, into Angola, into South Africa and whatnot. Now the problem at the moment is we don't necessarily have the infrastructure for transmitting the power or the pipelines for transmitting gas and oil, and secondly, very often the legislative and regulatory regimes are not in harmony. So that creates all sorts of add-ons in terms of the cost for developing the project. So we're going to be talking a lot about regional integration. And then secondly, we're going to be talking a lot about leadership and talent, because, and this is a global problem in the energy sector, you can't identify the Richard Branson, for example, of the energy sector. There's no leading light in energy. And we need people who are inspirational, who are going to drive and get people excited about these projects so that we can deliver them. And then we need to pull in behind them, has to come the talent to actually do the implementation and the operation of those
to carry it off. Let's turn our attention a little bit. Well, first let's talk about Globeleq, your presence and your role that's going to be happening at this Energy Indaba.
Essentially, we'll be providing what you might call a lead in renewables. Since inception in 2002, we have installed no less than 14,000 megawatts of renewable energy worldwide. But in recent times, the shareholders who are the Commonwealth Development Corporation and the Norwegian Fund have decided that the focus should be Africa exclusively.
Yeah.
So we're looking to installing no less than 5,000 megawatts of renewable energy. We are developers, owners, and operators of such operations. 5,000 might look very, very small in the general scope, such as you would have in an ESCOM, but these are renewables. Wind, solar, hydro, small hydro, and perhaps oil and gas. But anything that does not pollute is what we're focusing on.
You're focusing in on. And which is what, I mean, we have all of these things at our disposal, and you'd think that that would be the route that we would take more in terms of solar and in terms of wind, I mean, particularly when it comes to energy. But it does appear, and I mean, we're seeing this very big shift now. I mean, we heard the President speak about it in our State of the Nation address last week, Thursday, about the issue of nuclear, and that South Africa is going to determine the affordability of it as to whether or not we are going to go in that direction. But if I think you speak to most, we are going to go in that direction. What are your views? Will this be discussed?
Well, I think we've got to be clear. South Africa is already in the nuclear business. We already have Joburg, we already have the nuclear regulator and the necessary infrastructure. So it's not a question of whether we're going to be nuclear or not.
Yeah.
The question is whether we're going to now expand the fleet. And I'm very excited about the fact that we've now taken this next step so that we can get formal bids from potential suppliers, and we can really get the costs out on the table. At the moment, the numbers that have been bandied around are really speculative. They are extrapolations of costs from other parts of the world, and they're not, you can't say that they're accurate in terms of what's going to happen in South Africa. So now we'll get real numbers and we'll really be able to make some hard decisions. There's a lot to be said for expanding the nuclear fleet, because we're already carrying the nuclear infrastructure and we're loading that all on a very small base, just Joburg nuclear power station. Now if we build more nuclear projects, we don't have to have a one-to-one relationship in terms of how we have to expand the regulator, etc. So we can get better economies of scale. So I think nuclear is one of the options. There's definitely a massive place for renewables, particularly, and Dr. Khoza hasn't spoken about off-grid electrification, but renewables are definitely the way to go in solving the problem of many people in rural communities who have no hope of ever getting connected to the main grid in the near future. So, you know, it's horses for courses, and an integrated mix of technologies is definitely the way to go.
On a closing note, just very quickly, especially getting a comment from somebody who is in renewable energy, what are your views on nuclear? Do you think that South Africa should go and extend our foot into nuclear, as Brian says?
Undoubtedly, desirable as renewables may be, they may not be the full answer to the requirements. What we find most edifying lately, particularly after the deliberations between the political leadership and business, is that a great deal of realism has now emerged, where the focus is on something like 9,600 megawatts of nuclear. Whereas earlier on, I mean, it was actually left very, very open, and you cannot, approach it that way, because when all is said and done, you have to deal with nuclear waste. And that actually still presents a big problem. A big problem there.
Listen, this is going to be an interesting 2 days of conversations, no doubt. We've got 12 energy ministers that are going to be attending the 8th annual Africa Energy Indaba. It's being held in Sandton. Just talking to us about this was Brian Statham, who is the chair of the South African National Energy Association. Thanks for being our guest. And of course, Dr. Reuel Khoza, who is the chair of Globeleq, indeed in that arena of renewable energy, and talking about the energy crisis here in South Africa and on the continent. All right, let's take a break.